technical stuff, which is always a bit scary in case you press the wrong button and it all goes wrong. Sasha, introduce yourself as well.
Yes, I finished the email. Um, hey, I'm Sasha. It's so lovely to have you here.
Hi, Sasha.
Hello. Uh, as you might know, I co-authored the community canvas with Fabian. This is how I really got into this community building world properly. By background, I'm a designer. I work with a lot of startups, early stage companies, helping them with their communication, and I see a lot of overlap there, and I'm generally interested in systems and human interactions. So this I feel like the community part is at a much more human level than what I usually do, but it's very much related. So I really enjoy that about it.
Cool. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is, because we're going to record this and share this with the Community Builders group, I'll do a little bit of an intro. So for people who are going to watch the recording, so they have a bit of context. And then we will sort of go through a bit of the intention. Hi, Yasraj. Apologies if I pronounced your name badly. We've got people now joining the call. So like I said, I'll do a bit of an intro for people. So if you could all mute yourselves for now, and then what I'll do is I'll bring Alana in to talk a bit more about what she's here to share with everyone. And then we can have some discussions and conversations along the way. So, and thank you, Sasha. Excellent. Take some notes. So welcome to another Community Builders Learning Call. The purpose of these calls is firstly to connect all the people in the group. It's one of these things when you're doing something either for the first time or you're in the thick of it, trying to make it happen. It can feel like a lonely place, and having other people who are sharing that journey and can share those stories can really be an energizing experience. And that's one of the things that I've learned from my community building work. And another thing that a lot of you have asked for in the community is to hear stories of other people who created communities, and essentially kind of case studies to have a window into what that really is like. So I assume to get that sense of connection of the work, but also to kind of learn from real world experiences rather than just theory and people guessing as to what is the best thing. And what I value most is when we talk to people who've really done it and have tried it, and they can share the ups and the downs. That's much more nourishing and also engaging, as well as educational than any other thing. So today I would like to introduce Alana. She is the founder of the Incel community. And what I'd like for her to do is to maybe talk a bit more about herself and share her background in terms of the community that she created and also her story along the way. And then we'll touch on some topics that Alana and I discussed earlier around the journey of transformation, successes and failures of online communities, particularly for Alana and the Incel community, what that means in terms of hosting a community and her experiences around that, and also sustainability, energetically and financially. So those are some of the topics that I'd like to see if we can touch on. So please put your thinking caps on if you have any questions around those. As I talk to Alana, if anything comes to mind or you have a question that you want to ask straight away, maybe type it into the chat, and Lana and Sasha will make sure that they flag that up and we can put those questions to Alana. And then we'll see also, one of my intentions for Alana as well, is for her to benefit from the wisdom of this group. And if she has any questions or thoughts or questions for you guys, maybe you can also share your thoughts and experiences. So to begin with, over to you, Alana. Please introduce yourself in the way you feel best. Oh, and you're muted at the moment.
Sorry for the slight muting delay. Hi, so my name is Alana, and in 1997, I created an internet support community and it was called Involuntary Celibacy. It was a web page back when you coded your own HTML, and there was a mailing list that my friend hosted on his server. And I did a bit of publicity through not just the Usenet online news group system that used to be quite functional, but also through paper newspapers distributed in my own city. And what this resulted in was finding lots of people who had never dated or who had struggled a lot with dating or for whatever reason were celibate and not willing to be celibate. They actually wanted to be having partners, having dates, having lovers, having relationships, having sex. Like I said, this was 1997. The world has changed a lot since. And when I started the community, it was it grew gradually. It was relatively healthy. People talked to each other. Of course, it consisted of a lot of people who were lonely and depressed, because that's what's related to being celibate or lonely or never dating. And over time, I drifted away from this community that I had started. It was a mailing list. It didn't really need a moderator because people were friendly and helpful to each other and well-behaved. But it definitely drifted over time. By the year 2000, I was pretty much out of the picture. I found someone else in the group to pass on the website, and the mailing list, it went away, and other people started new online forums. And there's been quite a history since then of a lot of different online forums. There has been little or no in-person community building for involuntary celibacy, which sometime during those early years became known as Incel, just as an abbreviation. And sometime in the early 2000s, it went from being a community that was mostly straight men, but still open to people of other genders, other orientations, to being an exclusively straight male community. And sometime around the time of Gamergate, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it became quite toxic and part of the manosphere as it grew to be a very anti-woman and anti-feminist community. And yet it is still a supportive community. There are a lot of people on the various incel forums who help each other through personal struggles, including starting to date. There's a lot of issues there. There's been violence and murder that's resulted from people feeling very strongly about their views against women, and their complete frustration at not finding dates. So it's a very strong community that has some great weaknesses and some great problems. So that's kind of my introduction. I'm to that community. What I'm doing now is a project called Love Not Anger, which is a response to the murders by incel men who were angry. And that's a project to encourage research to happen in this field to reduce loneliness. It's a project to encourage people to get support and for people to provide support, and to raise awareness of the whole issue in a non-stigmatized, respectful fashion, because what I've observed is that a lot of people in this world who have very little experience or no experience with dating and sex. They're adults who just haven't gotten started. They would like to be late bloomers. And instead of getting help from society, they are getting stigma for being single and for being virgins. This is not effective. It's not helping people. And there's a lot of people out there who are very anxious and depressed because of not only of their loneliness, but because of the stigma they get for it. And there are people of all genders and orientations in this situation. I've done research on this now. So the Love Not Anger project is an online project. I've got 2 websites, one called lovenotanger.org and another one called connecttohope.net. I'll type that into the chat in a moment. And the Connect to Hope site is support, while Love Not Anger is more awareness, research, and response. So, Carlos, do you have any general questions to get me started?
There are a number of things there that I'm curious about. So it's quite interesting that you started this community more than 20 years ago, and the technology has just gone leaps and bounds, a complete different landscape. I'm just curious from your experience of building relationships and connections, which essentially sounds like via email, compared to what you see is available now. And maybe there's from your experience, of the pros and cons of the two different platforms or types of platforms that are available now.
So you're thinking about working via text only versus video
yeah,
today?
particularly I think from your experience, the type of community you were building, is there something special about?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to start. Yes, the original community was text only. We were probably using dial-up modems at the time. And if you are good at writing, text only is a great way to communicate, especially if you're ashamed of who you are because you've been stigmatized, or you're isolated and socially isolated in some way. But what's happening today is there's not just a lot of text communities for incels. There's people who make videos on YouTube, and all sorts of video sharing happening through the various online gaming universes and so on. But there is a lot. The manosphere and the incel support sphere cross over into those worlds. I'm not a great expert on that because I don't actually spend any time in the incel community today. I would not be welcome as a woman, and as you can imagine. And because there is still a lot of stigma and shame, not everybody out there in this community wants to be seen on video. There's a lot of people who feel that their appearance is the big reason for their dating problems. Usually they're wrong, but they do often feel very ashamed of their appearance. And it's been well documented. There's a lot of news articles out there about some extreme cases where guys believe they need to have plastic surgery. So, no, you probably need therapy, not plastic surgery. But there's a lot of people believe this. So the technology today, it's somewhat different, but I haven't seen examples where people get together via video, and they create stronger bonds within the community of other lonely people, of incels, but it hasn't actually changed their relationship with the rest of the world. In fact, the creation of the incel community seems to have separated lonely folks more from the mainstream of people who might actually help them socialize and find friends and partners. So I think this is a really weird case where community building has been at least as harmful as it has been helpful.
Wow. And because when we first talked on our before this call, and we were getting to know a bit more about this, or I was getting to know a bit more about the story, there's this interesting challenge of you're trying to build community with people who aren't particularly comfortable in a social environment.
Exactly.
And then there was, and that's why I was touching on that question around that text-only interaction, which creates, I would say, a level of safety and detachment from that immediate experience of having a conversation with people. How did that work for you in terms of managing those conversations and essentially encouraging people to join in? Did you do anything in particular, or it'd be interesting, to talk through the day-to-day of managing a community pre-2000?
You're asking me to try and remember something that happened pre-2000 here. It took a little bit of promotion at the beginning. I wrote a few stories with personal and political reflections and shared those around the internet and some newspapers as well, to encourage people to join. But believe me, there was pent-up enthusiasm to talk about issues once the issue was articulated clearly. Because what I did there was I gave a name to something that had been bothering a lot of people for a long time. I called it involuntary celibacy, and a non-judgmental name really helps people talk. There was ongoing communication within the mailing list. I definitely chatted with people and continued conversations, and but I wasn't really in a good advisory role. I was in my 20s. I had a tiny bit of dating experience, and I didn't really fully understand all the issues that people had. People came there with a lot of personal struggles, family struggles, mental health struggles, and I was in no way qualified to counsel them. And I think that reminds me of one of the things that Carlos and I talked about in our pre-discussion, which is that some communities need hosts or experts or elders of some kind to actually achieve the goals of the community. So for incel people, if they talk to each other and they're all struggling because they don't know much about social skills and dating skills, then they're just sharing information that they got somewhere on the internet. There's nobody in that community with real experience. In fact, some of the current incel communities push people out if they, quote, ascend, if they become if they become experienced with dating. Not all of them, I'm sure, and some people just leave because they don't need this group anymore. That was what was happening to me. I did not need this group for support. They were not helpful for me for support, so I moved on. And now I understand more that there's a different role for a moderator, an elder, a host, or whatever the role is in certain kinds of communities where people are learning. They're supporting each other, but they need to learn from people who have achieved something that they haven't yet achieved.
So it sounds to me there's two aspects to that community, or two elements of value, for want of a better phrase. One was a sense of connection. So there's this issue of loneliness and feeling like you're dealing with this on your own, and then the community appeared and that addressed that need. And then there was a question of transformation, of getting from a place of I don't know how to create these intimate relationships to getting to a place where I can actually create one. And so what you were saying there is that these are a bunch of people trying to work it out amongst themselves with no guidance. And what it did sound like is once someone had worked it out, not only did they no longer feel the need for the community, but also they were pushed out, or they were not.
Not when I was running it, but there have been recent reports that that's what happens because a lot of the current incel communities believe in what they call the black pill, which includes the idea that person will be forever alone. They will never find a partner, and they have given up. So I call it given up, actually. You don't have to be in the manosphere and anti-feminist to have given up, believe me. There are a lot of people who just believe they are stuck forever lonely, but they're sad about it, or angry, or both. So back to what you were saying, yes, there's definitely a need for support where people feel belonging and community with each other, and that's really important for people who are socially isolated. A lot of people who are incel or inexperienced with dating, either one, are also struggling to find friends. They don't fit into society for whatever reason. And because they are socially isolated, they find the internet is a great place to find connection with other people. And a lot of men have joined those incel forums because it's the only place they feel they belong. They've been rejected everywhere else. And some people get accepted in forums even though their behavior is inappropriate and extreme, and I've seen some examples in news articles. So that need for connection and belonging is really, really important to people. And if somebody's being rejected by society and stigmatized, they're likely to go and find some community home that accepts other people who've also been rejected. And sometimes that includes a lot of less than ideal behavior in the, various kinds of online radicalization, including violence, might be supported by a community that's full of people who've been rejected by society for their bad behavior elsewhere. So you can see how this can become kind of toxic. And if you have a community of more negative influences and fewer positive influences, guess what the result is? So this has been a great learning experience in how not to design a community. But on the other hand, the Incel forums are very strong communities. They keep going. Every time somebody shuts one down, another one pops up. And because there is such a strong need for this support and community and belonging. And like I said, there are some people in those Incel communities who have completely given up on dating, and they still want to feel they belong somewhere. And there's other people who really would like to start dating, and they want support to learn how to build their social skills and their dating skills and whatever else is inhibiting them in a barrier. And those are two different kinds of situations that people have.
It's interesting. There's a couple of things that spring up for me, but for everyone else on the call, Matthew, Rebecca, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who R is, but if you have any questions, whatever they may be, or any thoughts, please share them in the chat, or if you feel like it, please come onto the call, raise your hand, or say something in the chat, and I'd love to bring you on to pose a question. When you were talking there, Alana, there was the thing that sprang to mind. So there's the people who come together, these communities, when they get shut down, they still pop up again, because there's this sense of connection and belonging. I would interpret in terms of a way of validating my worldview and how I see the world, and to be around other people who make me feel that's okay. And then there's other need for transformation and learning, which is part, I think, talking to your thing of guidance and how do you go from a place of not knowing how to create these intimate connections to how you can do it. Now, that would take people who want to offer their time and experience to do that. And it sounds like because of the way these communities come together, there's not as many people wanting to invest that time and energy to help, or is that?
Yeah, there's some definite issues with finding people, human resources, who can do something to help. Within the Incel communities, they are online forums that do have moderators that implement various different moderation rules and expectations depending on the particular forum. And they work for free. They're recruited from community members, and I've seen call-outs, we need more moderators, and it takes a lot of multiple moderators to keep a big forum going. And it's the same as any other support or online forum kind of community. It's done for free. And there is some beneficent soul out there who does the general administration work of running the server. And whatever their motivations are, it's volunteer work. I haven't heard of any examples, certainly not from the Incel community, where people pay to belong to a forum that gets moderated by paid people. And that's the big challenge. So when I started the Love Not Anger project last year, my first thought was, hey, let's create a new forum that's clean and healthy and safe, and accepts people of all genders and respects everybody and bans violence and makes sure that we have some very strict moderation guidelines. And of course, I personally don't have time to moderate that. And it takes a lot of spoons, mental health capacity, to read the kinds of depressing things that people write, the kinds of violent things that people might be thinking, the level of anti-feminist or just plain clueless about women stuff that people write. And so to find a moderator for that kind of work would require a special person, a person who has mental health training and capabilities, and a person who has the capacity to read an awful lot of unpleasant stuff. And that person deserves to be paid, and paid well. And so one of the first things I did was I talked to a therapist I know who seemed to be short of employment, and I thought, how would you like to, moderate this forum with, healthier incel community? And she says, "Oh my God, no!" And she ran away screaming from the conversation. So that was my first clue that there might be a problem. The second clue was that the first time I asked for donations from the world, who was like I was getting a lot of media attention. I got people attacking me for asking for donations, and maybe I should have been more durable to this attack. But the issue is that this particular community, the incel people, have been exploited by a lot of scammy pickup artists who want to make money off lonely men who, if they follow the recipe and the routine, they could pick up girls wandering down the street. I guess for some guys it works. It doesn't work for a lot of lonely people to go and pick up girls according to formulas. But there's a lot of people out there, dating coaches, pickup artists, who have the seduction community, it's called. They have sold a lot of information to guys who think they can get a girl this way. So the incel community doesn't want to get scammed by people trying to make money off of it. I do now ask for donations on my website, but it's not bringing in a lot of money because it's not a formal charity and so on. So the actual revenue prospects for helping people who are depressed and often underemployed or unemployed are kind of bad. They also have the problem that this is a stigmatized group. So although there's been lots of media attention and people sound sympathetic, because it's a stigmatized group, first for being single and virgins, and now for being potentially violent incel murderers, not a lot of people want to actually pony up money to support a group that might be helping someone go out and murder more people because they've become an evil rather than a group of lonely people who we can sympathize with. And grouchy misogynists are not a very sympathetic group. So you can see that there's a revenue issue here. And so sustaining a community with a mental health professional being paid hasn't happened yet.
So what I got from there's this, I would say there's a social purpose behind this community. There's a very positive intention. But because of the landscape in terms of the media and what's happened in terms of people's perceptions of what these communities are about, that's kind of drowned out the potential benefits that these communities could create for society. And so I'm curious about that because within the experience I have of people in social enterprise who are trying to build, essentially, rather than just be a charity, how can I make this work sustainable in itself? There is this issue of beneficiary and customer, who's benefiting and who's paying. And then there's even for any business, the marketing around that. How do you get that message and story out in a way that engages people who want to contribute to the mission and help you? So that's what I heard from you in terms of this kind of challenging place of a real need to make a difference, but then the practicality I think that must have been Stephen there. Sorry, Stephen, I just got to mute there. It's a bit noisy. But the practicalities of actually making that financially and energetically sustainable, because like you said, you need a therapist there who can contribute a lot of time and energy to help these people. So I think with that lens as well, I don't know if any of you out there who's listening, who's had experiences around trying to generate some funds and revenue to help a cause, and how you tell a story around that. Maybe something around that. I'd be curious to know. Or any specific questions for Alana herself around the journey of the community Incel when she first started, or even now at the moment where she is at the moment with Love Not Anger. And what was the other one?
Connect2hope.net. That's the second website that I've created that's support information, and it's aimed at adults who have little or no dating experience. It doesn't talk about the incel communities and the violence and the misogyny and all that stuff. It just talks about the issues of loneliness and social skills, and it's aiming to provide people more hope that they can find social connections. And the particular thing I'm doing there is linking to therapists. So this is just still building. But what I've learned from lonely folks is that in general, they very often want to find a good psychotherapist or other counselor who can help them improve their lives. Sometimes they can't afford that. Sometimes they can. And sometimes they've tried counseling but found that the therapist didn't really understand their dating issues. And so one thing we need to get is better guidance for the therapy community at large to understand what are the reasons that people have dating difficulties, because there's a lot of different causes, and how to respectfully counsel and treat someone who comes into the office with that issue. So I'm trying to get that movement. I'm not a therapist myself, so I don't have the expertise, but I'm trying to gather that gradually, and there's a blog and opportunities to grow that network of counselors on the Connect to Hope website. And we've got a question now.
Yes. So we have a couple, actually. One is, what do you think are essentials for communities of belonging to flourish? Does that make sense? What are the essentials for communities of belonging? What do we need to make?
What are the critical factors that make a community flourish? And I mean, I'm not an expert in this, you guys are, but one thing that really helps is having enough people who say something, people who are outgoing enough to speak up and provide some fodder for discussion. And it helps to have welcoming when somebody new joins. I belong to another online community where the instructions were, when you first join the mailing list, introduce yourself. They had a few prompt questions, and those prompt questions would often generate questions and difficulties that the new member had, and the existing members could go and have a discussion about it, and there would be a lot of back and forth, and it created some pretty good belonging to that online community. So anybody else have ideas about this?
I would say also, it sounds like, particularly, thinking about your experience early days of Incel, a real clear purpose for that community to exist.
Yeah.
So people really knew why they were there and what they were trying to achieve by being a part of it.
Absolutely, yes. I didn't realize that there would be community. I guess there are some communities that are a little vague, but no, it's got to be pretty clear. Defining who belongs and who does not is a tricky issue. I've been kind of general about it, trying to describe the issue of involuntary celibacy, or now the issue of having little dating experience. And a lot of people joined even though they weren't exactly the same as each other. And this created a bit of confusion and friction. They had somewhat different beliefs of why they were involuntarily celibate. And that's true today with the current incel communities. People have some people join because they're angry at women and they got divorced, and they have plenty of dating experience, but they're not dating now because they're too angry. And that's a very different issue and situation than someone who's never dated and believes they will never get a date. Um, so those different struggles people have get kind of mixed up in the same community. So having a clear definition of who belongs and some wiggle room, some allowance to include your friends who are close to belonging. So on this new site, Connect to Hope, I call it little or no dating experience, because there's a lot of people who have a tiny bit of experience, but still they're struggling a lot. And there are people who have no experience whatsoever. And they're all welcome to come and comment on the blog posts and get some benefit from it. The original Incel community attracted a few people who called themselves Marceller, marital celibates. And I was not expecting this at all. These are people who have successfully gotten married and presumably dated and had sex when they were starting to get married, but they're stuck in a celibate marriage. They're unhappy. They're not, their relationship is broken down, but for some reason they're not willing to get a divorce. And, we're talking about people in societies where divorce is common and accepted. So I could not understand why they were there. And eventually I heard from enough, some of the marital celibate people said, I'm staying together for the sake of the children or whatever moral values, and eventually they get divorced once they realize they really need to. But I've spoken to another marital celibacy person, and it's pretty clear that they're staying in the marriage because if they left, they would be even more lonely. They somehow lucked into that relationship, which happens to a lot of people. They're not sure how they ended up dating this person. They decided the person was good enough and they'll get married just to lock it in so they have someone for life. And guess what? It doesn't work out. They're stuck with someone, but they're afraid if they leave, they'll never find a date again. They'll never find a partner again. And that's really sad, but that's, one of the issues that people come up with. So anyway, the definition of who belongs in a community can be pretty important. And I've heard of incel communities that reject people who don't fit their definition, and the definitions vary. So it can be pretty harsh if you don't fit the criteria.
It's interesting. Sasha, yeah, I was wanted to bring you in because maybe you have some thoughts around that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this. It's quite interesting because to me, I'm thinking about it like, everyone is lonely for maybe sort of different reasons, but then they construct this mental model of like why it is that they're lonely, right? Or they can't get what they want, meet somebody, and I think that seems to be like the crucial difference, right? Because if I'm, I'm not meeting anybody, and it's funny, even in a city like New York where there's tons of, like I hear people all the time, and there are people who I feel like are very well connected and have friends, and they still feel lonely. So there's something really powerful there. But the thing is, I'm lonely, but then I'm blaming somebody else for my loneliness, right? And I'm getting angry, or I'm deciding, oh, I just don't have enough experience, or I'm not doing things properly. I can learn something, right? So, and I can see, like, if you put those two people into the same room or space, that's going to be very tricky because they have a similar problem. But the reason they're giving or their solutions to it, like anger is one, and the other one is, oh, I want to learn. They're very different, right? Their approaches to that are very different. So it's kind of interesting. It's making me think about, it's maybe not so much like, yes, who, but like, what are their approaches to solving this? Like, if we can all agree we want to solve this by learning together, we can do this, but if we want to solve this by being angry, I mean, yes, maybe those people, but I don't even know how effective that is. But that was my thought on that.
Yeah, those are very important reflections, because there's the group that is angry, there's the group that is trying to change and learn and improve their lives, and there's the group that's sad and stuck and not changing. And and these three groups, sometimes they interact. The people who are optimistic and trying to change are really useful in any group, because they can encourage the sadder people to see that, hey, maybe there's some progress they could make. I'm not sure if they help the angry people very much. I mean, there's different degrees of anger, and somebody who is kind of angry but willing to be convinced that life could be better, there's hope there. That anger is a way to make progress. But there's other angry people who are stuck and they want to stay angry because it somehow satisfies them. And those are very difficult people to help and have a community with, unless your community consists of sharing angry memes and yelling. But I want to point out that a lot of the incel folks want to change society as well as change themselves in their own lives. And I think this is actually a good point, because society has a lot of stigma against single people and virgins. The way they've chosen to change society with mass shootings and murders is not great, but there are definitely things that need to be changed in society, perhaps through education and awareness, and looking for youth who need some help with social skills. Those are some societal changes I would recommend. So I think that there's, so having a community where people feel they belong and can be optimistic and look for ways to learn and change, that's pretty positive.
So bringing it down. So deconstructing it a bit, because I'm curious about looking at the different communities and what are the elements that worked and maybe didn't work and what we can learn. I think one of the things that was interesting for me is in this question of who's in and who's out, and also looking through the lens of the community canvas and the models and the ideas that Sasha and Fabian and the team have created from their studies of community. There's this aspect of having a clear set of values, or kind of something that defines, and whether it's a need or some values that defines that, this is a community for you. But also what I heard there is kind of this being open to actually some surprises, where initially this was for people who never dated, to realizing actually there's people out here who have but can't feel like they can date again. And then that raises a more fundamental connection, which is around loneliness and less about, and that in a sense kind of broadens slightly the community in the way it captures people. And then the other element that I've learned from reading the community canvas and thinking about these things is the purpose. There's the higher purpose of the group. What is this group coming together to do? And what I heard you say was actually there's some changes in society that need to be made, that we believe that's necessary. And then there's the individual purpose. The need is I also want to become connected to someone else. I want to learn how to create relationships. And so those are the two things, again, I'm thinking of anyone else listening to this, thinking about their own community and what that means and how I want to design a community, is I hear that purpose and who's in, who's out, and how you decide those criteria from what you were saying, Alana. Does that make sense?
Those are both important. And I see an interesting question in the text here, or the chat. What worked in getting people to contribute or help in the community? And this is an interesting challenge because I've been asking for volunteers to help me, and I've occasionally gotten people who want to do something to help my Love Not Anger project recently. And what has inspired people to do something is the opportunity to tell their own story. I ran a survey. And I asked people to do lots of writing, fill in the blank questions to tell their story. And I got lots of responses. People shared the survey. And I asked people to write their own stories to post on the new website, Connect to Hope. And those have been successful. When I did the original community building back in 1997, there were a lot of people who sent in their own stories and references to books and movies and songs that were about celibacy and loneliness. And so people like to share stories. People have been a lot less interested in doing some of the other work that would actually be helpful, particularly research work. There is, if you're an academic, you're familiar with the concept of the literature search. With this particular topic, the literature out there is, there's very little about involuntary celibacy itself. There is tons of literature about associated topics in many different directions. So the literature search is difficult and large, and I've done a little bit of it. I need help, and it's been difficult to find academics who are interested. I've had people who say they want to volunteer, and they're all enthused because they care a lot about the incel situation, perhaps because the murders affected them personally or emotionally, and they don't stick with it. It's hard to keep volunteers going. You need to have some kind of community of belonging of volunteers, apparently. Like those moderators on the forums, they have their own separate discussion area to talk amongst moderators and share experiences and help each other if they're going to be a successful moderation group. So I think that opportunities where you're creating a group where people belong to the volunteer group, that can help. But people really want to talk about themselves. And they're not as interested in doing administration paperwork or anything that seems like work. So that's what I found so far. Anybody else have any ideas of how they encourage people to contribute in a community?
Sasha.
Oh yeah, I was gonna see if anyone else, but I wanted to say something. I mean, yeah, I guess the whole admin thing is nobody likes doing admin things in their own lives. So then obviously that's hard. I mean, I feel like it's similar in our group here. You know, we've somehow forged a pretty strong connection, and you know, I think it's 4 or 5 of us that are trying to run the the co-builders group. So and that's been going pretty well. But yes, it's like we are our own little community within the community. That's quite interesting too. But I wanted to say something too about the stories. I was just talking to somebody else, and we're talking about conflict resolution and good methods around that. And he said he had an experience recently where he was sort of in this conflict situation with 2 other people, and the way they started resolving it was everybody started telling their life story.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, that's interesting. It took a while, obviously, for everybody to do that. And, but it made me think, like, it actually makes a lot of sense because it builds a lot of empathy. Because suddenly you're like, oh, I understand where this person comes from. Oh, like they had a lot of similar or different experience, but I can relate to them. So I thought that was quite interesting. Just made me think of that. And, that telling your life story to someone, it's also a very vulnerable thing. There's lots of details you don't really tell anyone. And, so I thought that was really interesting. It's very simple, but it's so powerful. I thought that was a great idea. Anyway, that just resonated when you were talking.
So from my experience of what, being involved with the community builders group and contributing in this way, a big thing is a sense of connection with the people, actually liking the people that I'm working with. I really like Sasha, and I really have enjoyed being in his company. The same with Lana, and same with Brooke, and then also with Karim. It's that feeling of these are people that I can get on with, but also that sense of I'm learning something, so I'm getting something out of it as well as contributing. And that's, I think, is an important, for me personally, and I think in other people, that's quite a strong incentive. There's that give and take aspect to it. So yeah, it's really interesting. And there's someone, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what your name is, but she's down here. He or she's down as CEPV. She says for them, getting contribution is immensely frustrating. And they were asking, how do you deal with not having time as the main excuse or problem to getting people engaged and participating actively? So I assume people say, oh, I just don't have enough time to contribute.
Excuse is a good word there.
Sorry?
Excuse is an important word there, because when someone has to say no, they're looking for the most excusable reason. And of course, they're busy. Everyone has things to do. But it's funny how if you're really motivated to do something, you will find enough time to do something on that project. So it's hard to ask people what's their real reason for not contributing. It's hard to ask of someone who showed up to volunteer one time and then disappeared. I used to belong to a group where people would show up for the first meeting and they'd never come back again. And I could guess why they might not come back, but I didn't really know. I didn't know if it was because the meetings were boring or they didn't get anything personal out of it, or that we were kind of a clique that they didn't feel they belonged to. But it was something like that people don't want to say because they expect to get, insulting and defensive and stuff. So getting people to contribute to your community, maybe that's a second stage after getting someone to feel they belong, so that they're invested and they really want to maintain that community. Because once an organization starts going, people want it to keep going, no matter whether its purpose is important or not, whether it's expired. No, people want their organizations to keep going so they can keep having meetings with the same friendly people.
An experience that I've had, again, with the community builders group here, is just having a very clear role and like a very well-defined thing. Whether it's, for me, I get energy from doing these calls, and so that's where I will pour my energy, and I don't feel it's something that drains me. But also having said, just spend 10 minutes a week doing something. I feel that's creating a very tiny habit that people will find manageable, but also will contribute in some way. That's my feeling around this. Any thoughts, Sasha?
Yeah. I feel like I guess I totally agree. I think it's really helpful, right? Especially if you can split things into very small, easy, specific tasks. You can also have lots of people doing them, right? Which help, like you can distribute sort of the workload, but in the end, it always falls back to a small group of people, maybe one or two, who have to coordinate all of that. And I feel like that's the hardest part, right? And it's like, I think that's kind of the weakest link oftentimes. And if that person isn't around or doesn't do their thing, then it doesn't really work. So that's really hard. How do you find that kind of group and dynamic that allows it even to work? Like I have like a freediving community here in New York, right? It's actually hard to go freediving, but there are lots of people who love freediving here. But I'm the person that's organizing it, and I was traveling and I wasn't here. And I was very happy because somebody was like, "Oh yeah, let's have another meetup." And I was like, "I'm not there, so you organize it, go for it. I'll help you, but I can't do it right now." And so I was really excited that they were going to have another meetup, but they posted like a message and there was like not so much engagement, and then they just let it be because it seemed too much work or too intense, or like it was a bit too pushy for them to maybe go through with it, because I feel like you always have to push people a little bit. But yeah, so it was interesting to see, somebody was interested in taking that role, but then it was too much and they didn't do it after all.
There's definitely there's the level of engagement where people are willing to show up for something that someone else organized, and there's the engagement where you want it so much that you're willing to take the social rejection risks involved in organizing an event and all the aggravation of finding a venue and getting the people and yada, yada, yada. So, what are the activities in this world that people are willing to spend time actually organizing events for? That's community building, and it takes real work.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Alana, with the social rejection that you put yourself in the position of potentially. And I think that's what stops a lot of people doing something like that, whether it's organizing an event, even organizing a party for themselves.
What if nobody shows up?
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. And I from the startup world where I work with entrepreneurs, the idea of selling something, offering something and saying, will you take it? They won't even do that just in case they get rejected. And so there's that. I feel that's a really interesting point for anyone starting something new or trying to gather people is like not. I read a book by a guy called Charles Vogel who was on a previous webinar, and it's the power of an invitation. And even if it's rejected, to remember that that invitation is really, really powerful for the person who receives it. And so to think that actually it's not that, oh no, they didn't get back to me. It's like, actually there was probably some value I even gave them by inviting them in the first place. And that for me is a really interesting way of reframing that.
Well, yeah, that people really enjoy being invited. It makes them feel like they belong and they're socially worthy.
Yeah.
And whenever you're having trouble organizing, some people like think about, is there a risk of rejection? Because a lot of people are very afraid of rejection and they don't know how to handle it. And that's one of the reasons for people being lonely and not dating. But it happens in work, in job hunting, in friends, socializing, volunteering. So like, think of that underlying social fear that people might have.
Mm. And I think, Sasha, you brought it really down to earth. You know, as we were talking about small tasks, small asks, as Alana put it on the Facebook group, and giving small things people can do easily. But there's still someone needs to coordinate it. Yeah. So someone has to say, have they turned up for that 10 minutes and did that work? It's like, that's still a job.
It is.
Cool. You want to say something, Sasha?
Oh, no. I was just like, yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end of the hour. I feel really fulfilled by this conversation. I think it was a really real conversation about community rather than just tactics and strategy. And so thank you very much, Alana, for sharing your story and sharing your thoughts. Any last minute ideas or thoughts that came to you while you were here? Or
I'm just going to thank you for inviting me to do this. And if people are curious about this or want to support it in some way, there's a lot of different suggestions on lovenotanger.org. And that's typed in the chat sequence.
Brilliant. And we'll put that as well in the comments on the Facebook Live video that's going to be in the community. And you also shared a book there around conflict resolution?
Yeah, it's a book by Edward Schein that happens to tell a story about people trying to resolve conflict through maybe sharing a bit of their own personal stories. But it's a book about a lot of vulnerability in holding conversations through very difficult conflict challenges. It's not necessarily about community building, but it might be related, and it's pretty cool.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Alana. Thanks, Sasha, for supporting me here today. And thank you, everyone, Matthew, Rebecca, Stephen, the letter R, and the letters CE and PV. I hope to see you again on another Community Builders Learning Call. And if you want to recap on all of this and and just refresh your memory on what Alana said, then you can watch the recording on the Facebook group. And we'll be putting it also on the YouTube channel that Sasha's created, and we'll share that link as well in the group. Well, again, have a great rest of the day, Alana. You take care.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully our paths will cross again soon. And again, bye, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye.